This is the first of two sessions of NCA practice talks. The next session will be Friday afternoon at 2 p.m. So it's 2 to 4?
2 to 4 about.
4 about. In this room with food. So I would encourage people to show up on Friday afternoon, in addition to those who are going to be giving a paper. And we'll do. We have 3 speakers today, and imagine you're in a windowless hotel room in San Francisco. Each of the papers, each of the speakers will have 12 minutes. Enforced, strictly enforced, and because we've scheduled these sort of on the 20s, like 12, 12:20, 12:40, so people can show up, we'll have a little bit of time for discussion, questions after each of the speakers, which is probably better than waiting until the end. So the first is Beth Boser of the USC Annenberg School for Communication, who will speak on redefining feminism and choice in the Feminist Case Against Abortion. Ms. Boser.
Thank you. I'm timing myself as well, so I'm sure I can switch over. This paper began about a year ago as a course project for the Rhetorical Criticism Seminar. Since that time, it's gone through a few revisions, and its most current version is titled Ethical and Practical Implications of Appropriative Definition in Pro-Life Feminism. I really enjoy studying what initially appeared to me to be bizarre instances of conservatism. So when I stumbled upon the organization Feminists for Life on the web, I had a feeling that I had discovered a fruitful space for analysis. Feminists for Life, the organizational home for individuals identifying as pro-life feminists, was founded in 1972 by women who felt marginalized from other women's rights groups due to their pro-life beliefs. Despite the fact that much scholarly attention has been paid to the abortion debate in general and various sorts of feminist movements and organizations, virtually no attention has been paid to seemingly contradictory pro-life feminism. Pro-life feminists, and Feminists for Life specifically, contend that choice, as it is conceived of by pro-choice activists, is harmful to women as it forces them to choose between themselves and their babies. Feminists for Life, or FFL, would instead offer women the choice to not have an abortion via what they term woman-centered solutions, which involve eliminating what they believe to be the root causes of abortion. The women of FFL contend that they are concerned with both women's and fetuses' rights. My primary text for analysis in this essay is the speech, The Feminist Case Against Abortion, which serves as a representative anecdote for pro-life feminism writ large. This speech is something of a landmark statement within pro-life feminism, as it encompasses their values and mission, and has been and continues to be delivered in various forms across the country. In this essay, I examine the ways in which the author of the speech, FFL President Saren Foster, argues for new definitions of the terms feminism and choice, essentially engaging in what amounts to discursive appropriation. It is necessary for her to do this to reshape widely accepted value hierarchies to make pro-life and feminism seem to not contradict one another. Using this process of redefinition within this text as an exemplar, I argue that pro-life feminism engages in a process of rhetorically removing agency from women and placing it into the situation through strategic association and dissociation. Association and dissociation are concepts borrowed from Perlman and Ulbrecht's Titeka, which center on the symbolic making and breaking of connections in language. I plan to focus primarily on the term choice here, but I will also spend just a moment on discussing the moves that pro-life feminism attempts to make to redefine feminism after a few general comments. The rhetoric of pro-life feminism does not center on typical pro-life messages such as abortion is murder, or abortion stops a beating heart, or life begins at conception. While the members of FFL may believe all of these things, their approach to the issue is more temperate, at least on the surface. Although messages surrounding the humanity of the fetus and the horrors of the abortion procedure exist in literature produced by pro-life feminists, the dominant message is one of concern for women. Pro-life feminists and FFL claim, for example, that women are coerced into abortions they do not wish to have, that women of low socioeconomic status and women of color are disproportionately coerced into abortions, that the availability of legal abortion causes women to be discriminated against in the workplace, that legal abortion allows men to shirk the responsibilities of fatherhood, and that legal abortion leads to higher rates of domestic abuse. All these negative consequences to women make pro-choice activism decidedly not feminist, according to pro-life feminism and FFL. In the speech, The Feminist Case Against Abortion, Sarah Foster works to glorify the group of women that she terms early feminists, or our feminist foremothers, and vilify contemporary pro-choice organizations. In other words, she attempts to dissociate feminism from its popular meanings and strengthen the connection between feminism and the first wave, largely associated with the suffragist movement. She argues that all early feminists, without known exception, were anti-abortion. The early feminists celebrated motherhood and would have opposed the controlling of fertility for the sake of fitting into a man's world. The Rhetoric follows a deductive definitional process by establishing what good feminism is, discrediting bad feminism, which is any feminism espousing a pro-choice value, and then explaining how she and others are working to carry on the legacy of good feminism. Closely tied to this reworking of the term feminism is the Rhetoric's attempted redefinition of choice. One of FFL's slogans is "refuse to choose." Foster therefore attempts to paint choice, as it is understood within pro-choice, to actually be a false choice. For pro-life feminists, choice is equated with women being forced to choose between two things when they should want and be able to have both. In her speech, Foster argues that early feminists felt that women would resort to abortion only if they had no other choice. In other words, if they had no resources of their own and no emotional support. Foster contends that contemporary women face the same dilemma and are driven to abortion because of a lack of resources and support. Foster attempts to break the connection between feminism and liberal notions of free choice and makes the case that things are not all that different than they were in the late 19th century. In her view, women undergo abortion for the same reasons today as 100 years ago. Thus, the arguments against abortion also remain the same. Instead of being a free and genuine choice, she says, abortion is a reflection that society has not met the needs of women. Foster says, quote, "Today we stand in solidarity with women who are coerced into abortion because they felt they had no other choice." The pro-life feminist position is that, given ideal circumstances, a woman would never choose to have an abortion. As Foster argues, if a woman has enough money and support to care for a child, there is no question that the woman will choose to carry her pregnancy to term. In this way, Foster removes choice from the realm of individual capacity and places it as simply another element in a deductive equation. If access to choice is determined solely by factors surrounding the woman, then the woman herself becomes devoid of agency and is removed from the conversation. Although Foster's case may seem on its surface to differ greatly than that of other opponents to abortion, both ultimately function to make the discourse about the woman rather than a product of the woman's capacity as a rhetor and interlocutor. Still, for Foster, genuine choice is achieved when pregnant and parenting women have access to affordable housing, childcare, and maternity coverage, and when, for example, student health centers offer information to pregnant students not only about abortion, but adoption and parenting as well. Foster says, quote, "We refuse to choose between women and children. No woman should be forced to choose between sacrificing her education and career plans and sacrificing her child," end quote. Foster argues that vulnerable women are thus coerced into abortion rather than freely choosing the procedure. Vulnerable women, according to the Rhetoric, are those who are poor, in college, have jobs that do not accommodate the needs of mothers, They have been betrayed by people they depend on, and they are scared and they underestimate their own personal strength. If these vulnerable women are given the support they need through the action of organizations like FFL, they will have the choice to not choose abortion. In other words, the Rhetoric argues that the established definition of choice is a bad or false choice, while her definition of choice is a good or genuine choice. This portion of the speech represents Foster's attempt to dissociate choice from its widely held meaning. Choice may seem to reside in individuals as a right enjoyed as part of liberal subjectivity, but in reality, choice is wholly constrained, limited, or enabled by the circumstances that surround an individual. As something of an aside, briefly, it's important to note also that pro-life feminists are in favor of the legal prohibition of abortion. If this weren't the case, if they were just going around saying, you know, we really hope that women don't ever feel as though they have to get an abortion if it's their only choice. We want to advocate for policy that ensures that this happens less frequently, and we need to stop punishing mothers. It would be a lot harder to critique them. But the fact that they want to remove abortion as a legal option for women demonstrates that they themselves do not believe their own argument about women being given the choice, never choosing abortion. So given this strange way in which pro-life feminism belies the inadequacy of its own argument, it might be tempting to sort of dismiss these people as, you know, wackos or something. But the way in which the redefinition in the speech functions as a symbolic remover of agency is significant and troubling. In the extended version of this essay, I try to connect this phenomenon to larger spheres of concern. First, I discuss problems of critical agency. Specifically, when I first approached this text, my initial instinct was to engage in some sort of feminist critique. But I found that the text really pushed back against that, as its new definition of feminism really almost challenged me to find a way to critique this feminism without essentializing what feminism is supposed to be. Second, I discussed the implications of the same phenomenon on a larger scale as related to problems of appropriative relativism in the political sphere. In a moment when the Tea Party is understood to be an exemplar of the power of grassroots activism, and freedom is just as likely to mean freedom to carry a semi-automatic assault rifle to a healthcare reform rally than anything else, it's difficult for a critic or citizen to find any stable discursive ground on which to stand. The crises of agency evident in these two larger concentric circles of concern are echoed in the case study of pro-life feminism, where women's agency is placed within a rhetorical bind that at bottom amounts to, given the choice, you would never choose this choice, so we will remove that choice and choose for you. Thank you.
So we have some time for questions. Good timing, by the way.
Thank you.
So this group believes that abortion should be prohibited. So they must believe that abortion is intrinsically wrong. Do they explicitly give their grounds for believing that? Because usually the grounds for believing that is religiously based. So are there sort of hidden religious agendas?
Well, the organization claims to be non-religious. They also claim to be non-political. But you know, if you read through essays that come from sort of individual women who are part of this, they're, you know, then they start getting into, you know, life begins at conception and the fetus is a person and that kind of thing. But in general, you know, as a group, they definitely downplay that and play up the idea that, you know, it's all about women and, you know, motherhood is natural and we should embrace that and not be punished for it. So, I mean, but those things are there, you know, kind of hidden, I would say. Larry, please go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, Nina.
I have a question and a comment. The first question, I may have missed this, is you talk about this being a speech, and I didn't understand who it was a speech to or what the context of that speech was, and that might be a useful background.
Yeah.
And the second comment is really just I don't know if it's rhetorical in and of itself, but you talk about this being an essay, and you may want to be a little bit stronger about it and talk about it being a research rather than an essay, which sounds like a school project, rather than something that is more serious and more kind of yours.
Thank you. Yeah, the context of the speech is it's largely delivered at college campuses actually, but it's in other venues as well. But the main audience is college students.
Is it on YouTube?
Hmm?
Is it on YouTube?
Yes, it is, and it's gone. I mean, it's changed over the years, but the speech that this woman is delivering today is still very much similar to what it was in 1998, I think, when she first wrote it. Marilyn.
I just wondered if you tied it at all into, or thought about tying it into the kind of recent trend of like the mama Riesling, the mama protective bent that a lot of candidates female candidates who are kind of on perhaps the Tea Party end of things, like Linda McMahon in Connecticut, or Sarah Palin, or the motherhood aspect, and if that's kind of beneath the Tea Party angle, or if that's a more direct connection than just the Tea Party writ large.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good. I hadn't thought of that actually. That's a good point. Yeah.
So, I mean, this seems like it's the perfect opportunity for the speech to take on like the underlying eugenics movement that happens with like pro-life, like Margaret Sanger and her whole history of being like a no eugenicist, and how they give like women of color are always pushed to have abortions, and it seems like this is like a different stance on that. Do they address that at all?
Yeah, I mean that's their. I mean, one of the arguments that they make is that women of color are pushed into having abortions, and so they sort of use that as a basis for their claim that abortion is harmful to women. And that's sort of one of those things where I completely agree with them, and I think this is really great. We should raise awareness on this issue or whatever. But then, why do you have to take it all the way to the legal prohibition of abortion? Like, that doesn't seem to be the fact that they do that sort of it makes it seem like they have a hidden agenda that maybe doesn't have to do so much with, caring about women who feel that they're sort of pushed into these things. But it is fascinating. Yeah. Yeah, Laura.
I love this talk and found the topic really fascinating. I have a few ideas. Jumping off this last one, that you could make that connection clear by speaking a little bit about the legacy of forced sterilization. I thought this might be a continuation of the process. In terms of tying it into our conservative friends and how they love to be moms, you could talk about Sarah and Bristol Palin and how they both went through with pregnancies that people might have thought twice about, considering the fact that she was an older mother with a pretty responsible job and a couple of other kids she was accountable to, and that the child wasn't physically developing, and Bristol was not out of high school. And finally, you might want to contextualize a little bit about what kind of history this group has with sort of following this has attracted, and if it's triggered any similar intellectual adoptions or positioning, so that we see whether they're fringe or something to take seriously, or something that acts as a facilitator of the movement.
Thank you. Yeah, Son.
I love, by the way you finish the paper with the focus on choice, making that your last word presentationally. I thought that was really terrific. I think the place to continue exploring, you may have very little time to do this. I don't know how much time you'll have when you're at NCA to present it.
Yeah.
But the whole concept of choice being what's at stake. And the argument about, in an ideal world, you would make this choice. Of course, finding yourself pregnant without a stable means of support, or maybe at a point where it doesn't work for your career, is not an ideal choice. And so the concept that you can rip an ideal choice from a real choice that real people face seems to me where the rubber hits the road in this paper.
Yeah.
And so I think you could explore that even more fully in your discussion of it, but don't lose that conclusion, which I thought was terrific.
Yeah, thank you. It's hard to know where to place the emphasis when you have 12 minutes, but I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, Tosh.
Just building off Alex's point, I guess another example you might want to consider is, I guess, what was the response? There was a big campaign, a big fuss, I guess, last year with these billboards that were placed in Atlanta. Basically, was focusing on women of color and abortion rates, and basically kind of pointed to them and made them the bodies where abortions are happening too much, and it really isolated them. And kind of the racial politics of these representations in terms of the debates about abortions, I guess. And kind of considering this organization or other organizations which promote a similar kind of logic, what is their relationship to these billboard campaigns?
Yeah.
I think we begin, but actually I have a quick comment
Oh,
also. I would say, given the limited amount of time, that I would advise spending a little less time basically saying what's in the speech.
Okay.
It seemed to me you gave more detail than is probably necessary. My guess is that your audience will be able to connect the dots.
Okay.
When you lay out what they're saying, I think the audience will get it. I think, as a lot of this discussion indicated, the context and the analysis should take up more time. I think you just gave more time than was necessary. And if the speech is that familiar, then people with an interest in the topic may well already know it.
Okay.
So I would sort of, reallocate more of the time to the kind of analysis that was suggested by this discussion than to saying what the speech is. The people who are interested will probably, go tell them it's on YouTube, and they can go and find it.
All right, I'll do that. Thanks, Larry.
You actually have about 30 seconds left, so you
And I talked a little faster
Go.
than I
Okay, next, continuing exactly the same theme. One of the consequences of this sort of session is that there is no clear coherence that the papers are expected to contain. But next, William McClain, also USC Annenberg, will address participation without guarantees, documentary, digital media, and hegemony.
Yeah, I suppose by way of a segue, I feel Beth had promised to set me up to look good, and then she did such a good job. I'm all the more intimidated to drag this sort of patchwork homunculus out in front of you. So I'm looking for advice on how to clarify this and how to shorten it, so please bear with me. From the belief that the internet is immune to censorship to Stuart Brand's assertion that information wants to be free, the foundational mythology of the digital age has been one of democratization, self-expression, and popular empowerment. Removing the means of production and preservation of knowledge from the reserve of those with power, and at least facing power's design. For the documentary film and video tradition, so long concerned with the imbalance of power between those who create knowledge and those rendered its object, such a stroke would seem to at last cut the Gordian knot that has so long plagued the ethical debates. Thank you. Sadly, it does not. The concept of participatory digital documentary production through new media technologies does not slice through the documentary form's ethical questions. Instead, it transforms them and injects them into a qualitatively different sphere. Most critically, the traditional focus on the interaction between documentarian and subject, and/or the evaluation of the ethical qualities of documentary text itself, must be regarded as insufficient for a world where the roles of subject, producer, and user of documentary are permanently blurred. This presentation is part of a much larger project, and one that does not lend itself to 12 minutes. So rather than provide a completely unsatisfying, superficial gloss of everything and nothing, I thought I'd provide a few thoughts on a few critical issues and a brief idea of where I think we might go from here, or at least where we might start. Traditionally, considerations of documentary ethics have focused on two critical points: the moment of production, wherein the relationship between documentarian and subject is constructed, and the documentary text itself and its assumed audience. Ultimately, both encounters become questions of power. Who can construct knowledge, who can represent whom, and how is that knowledge constructed as a normative process? In these encounters, the filmmaker has almost universally been seen as the more powerful party. As digital recording technologies and methods for the distribution of digital content expanded, this theoretically has undermined the traditional power imbalance that necessitated the original questions of documentary ethics by displacing any construction of official top-down discourse within a larger intertext. One could even argue that such a system would displace the need for stabilizing meaning within a single text by providing a sort of permanent intertextual instability. However, rather than resolving these issues, digital media instead only rendered them somewhat obsolete and found ample replacement. First, an example. On November 23, 2007, a YouTube user named Halo Gayboy posted the results of a bit of amateur ethnography in the form of a video entitled Halo 3, Homophobia Evolved. Using the nom de guerre Gayboy on the Microsoft Xbox Live online video gaming network, Halo Gayboy recorded the microphone chatter and games of Halo 3 in which he participated. In response to what Halo Gay Boy refers to as his proud and unambiguous gamer tag, he's subjected to repeated homophobic insults by other players ranging from the somewhat tautological, hey gay boy, are you a faggot or what, to I hope gay marriage never gets passed, have fun being single. Nor did it end in verbal abuse. Halo Gay Boy notes in his comments on the video that he did not include the repercussions he encountered during gameplay. Traditional documentary ethics would have us remain wary of Halo Gay Boy's ability to represent others as the documentarian. However, in broader cultural terms, it is difficult not to see Halo Gay Boy's video as a counter-hegemonic move, even if he is not resisting a centralized power source per se, but the diffusion of hegemonic power among relative equals. In fact, many of those who torment him might very well be constructed as normatively inferior to him in different contexts, such as class, race, or education level. Halo Gay Boy had the power, no doubt as a result of a certain degree of financial security and education, to employ his digital literacy to seek a form of redress. After all, while his fellow Halo 3 players had the opportunity to abuse him in-game, it was Halo Gay Boy who posted a video on YouTube that has received more than 800,000 hit views and 9,000 comments, the majority of which appear, at least to a superficial investigation, to be supportive. So if digital documentary production allows individuals to employ media practice as means to obtain an audible social and political voice, we might reasonably conclude that such works result from the exact sort of inherent democratization that was supposed to come as a result of these technologies. Unfortunately, we must remain wary of Halo Gay Boy and of his persecutors. We cannot continue to address this point of contact in such binary terms, and we must acknowledge that neither interaction nor participation necessarily equates to resistance to hegemonic values. After all, Halo Gay Boy's tormentors are participating through horizontally structured digital media quite lustily. Gramsci's concept of hegemony, based as it is on the creation of consent and legitimacy rather than enforced ideological values, suggests that even participation can be fully interpolated within hegemonic norms. This is not to say that all participation is always already politically neutered. As Stuart Hall argues, part of the value of Gramsci's concept of hegemony is that it appreciates that a non-reductive methodology requires acknowledging the inherently complex and politically multivalent nature of an individual that arises from the sometimes conflicting ideological confluence that they occupy. Halo Gay Boy's experience highlights a variation on Mark Andrejewicz's concept of lateral or peer-to-peer surveillance. While the primary focus of Andrejewicz's argument remains on the increased surveillance capabilities of traditional centers of power, he also notes the ability of individuals to monitor each other. Lateral surveillance is a two-way street, however. On the one hand, one has the ability to monitor others, and yet simultaneously, one must constantly be aware of being monitored. Andrejewicz's surveillance, however, is very much query-based. It is surveillance of asking questions and seeking out answers. The norm-enforcing quality of the pervasive, passive gaze Halo Gay Boy faced doesn't quite fit this model. Instead, we might borrow a term from computer science and refer to it as event-driven monitoring. Other Halo 3 players need not actively seek out homosexuals to abuse, but if one should become salient enough to reach a certain degree of threshold of visibility, then they will act against him or her. While the case of Halo Gay Boy was one of self-presentation and conscious challenge, in so doing he is seeking to undermine the invisibility of gay identity enforced by the intensely heterosexist community norms that underlie this passive surveillance. News feeds on Facebook, discussion forums, keyboards, and web monitors in the workplace, tweets, virtually any form of online interaction can be monitored in this way, not only by more official power sources, but by an unknowable universe of others. Monitoring for deviance in this fashion is far easier than actively seeking it out, which means that in practical terms, the threshold for salience can be lowered. This is particularly important for the great majority of people who rely on the defense of obscurity to protect their activities that might prove otherwise censorable. Someone could find out what one was up to, but no one's likely to care. No more. If Bentham's panopticon was based on the idea that one could never know if one was under surveillance, we now must deal with the constant certainty of being under surveillance, but not knowing by whom or why. Second, an aura of legitimacy, if not historical inevitability, surrounds the democratizing technology that enabled this surveillance, thanks to the counter-hegemonic ideals associated with the creation of the internet and digital technologies. Active surveillance, after all, seems much more like the less florized concept of stalking. Privacy is complex and profoundly situational, even though it's discussed in rather static terms of a sheltered space of withdrawal from the prying eyes of Big Brother. Instead, Lisa Palin and Paul Dorsch argue for viewing privacy as a dynamic process of boundary regulation based on cultural expectation and personal experience. The conception of privacy as a tension existing between power-hungry official power and a resistant individual ignores the fact that most considerations of privacy take place in day-to-day interactions with one's surrounding and peers, and that more privacy does not equal better privacy. The issue is control and understanding. The digital world offers profound challenges by concealing the context necessary for controlling privacy. Without knowledge of the context in which information is likely to be used, no one has control over their privacy, ever, because no one has a way to make normative judgments, the reflexive judgments necessary, and is therefore only safe in assuming the most unforgiving audience possible at all times. What I hope this example suggests is that we cannot continue to rely on the revolutionary potential of empowering the disenfranchised, simply adding to one term in hopes of equalizing the equation. Hegemony is not the only source of power. Our equation is more than two terms. Power is diffuse, but not in Hall's sense of a resistant spectator who is able to take a radical step against or away from dominant ideology or take advantage of marginalized media practices to speak against it. We do need to account for the fact that power can be asserted across a broad, shifting network of relations, and not merely as a sort of friction against centralized power structures. For the documentary, this requires a shift in focus from the isolated act of filmmaking and/or its result to an understanding of documentary production and consumpting as a wide-reaching social practice, and undertaken by diverse parties entangled in multiple power relationships. Going forward, we must take a pragmatic, piecemeal approach and attempt to determine if structures exist from which the effects of further documentary practice can be meaningfully extrapolated. Consent, as such, may be obsolete, but issues of privacy must be placed within a broader social context and understood in dynamic terms that at least attempt to create environments where the subject of media representation can make informed decisions regarding their privacy. If power is located in the ability to speak, we must now champion the power of choosing how to be heard. Thank you. Questions, comments, suggestions? Yeah.
It seems to me that the thing that came home to me most powerfully throughout the talk was this issue of, and I really like the way you phrased it, the difference between more privacy and better privacy. And if there was a way to back some of that up into the beginning of the talk so that you have a clear line all the way through it, it might be easier to follow, because you have a lot of very interesting concepts and very interesting ideas that you're kind of knitting together, but something that's really straightforward as kind of a spine through it, I think would make it a little easier to follow. And the privacy thing makes sense to me, but there may be something else that is a better line.
Yes.
Connecting with that, I think, and connecting with the fact that your primary example that you give is one of self-presentation, which sort of raises sampling questions, and you need to be clear as to what it is, what that's a representative of.
Yeah.
But one of the interesting dilemmas or these conflicts around the concept of privacy is that much of the in much of the discussions over decades now, but certainly even today, is where privacy is coercive rather than protective, which is to say, often the message is we don't want to know about it, we don't want to see it, and this example would be one of them. What Gateway?
Halo Gateway.
Halo Gateway. Halo's the game.
Yeah.
What he's doing is insisting on being public about something that otherwise would be private. In other words, he's been criticized for insisting on being visible about something that otherwise people would know, and making it public. So the other side of that often is where privacy is enforced rather than as it were, protected, because much of it has to do with the things we don't want to know, we don't want to see. And a lot of the complaints is that we're being forced. I mean, the phrase used, sort of in the context of gay issues all the time is it's being forced down our throats or shoved down our throats or other interesting metaphors about what is being put out in public that children will see, that other people will see. So you're focusing on one particular aspect, and this whole question of surveillance, and is not the same as the question of self-presentation. So you sort of have to pull apart which ones you're dealing with. I mean, they all may be relevant, but they're not all the same.
Yeah, I think because the issue of the coercive nature of privacy is one of the many things that kind of got slowed off in the revision process. Because I talk about that a lot in the larger project, but I think more than anything, and I made a note as soon as I finished, is that I think I need a much clearer transition about why I'm talking about privacy in the first place. Because the position I'm trying to take is that, on the one hand, you have the Halo Gateway example, which I feel like is sort of a it neatly fits in kind of this panopticon vision of the world, and again, the coercive privacy. But at the same time, you also have his ability to represent them doing that. And that's why I wanted to sort of kind of throw the traditional positions up in the air a little bit by saying that, well, we need to be concerned about both points in the story, both them, monitoring him through digital technology and acting against him, and him monitoring them and acting against them. Because I mean, it was pretty clearly, sort of a agent provocateur kind of move, and I think that that's really interesting, but would be a lot less comforting in a context in which I agreed less with his politics. So I feel like now I don't think the paper gets that across at all, and I think a stronger transition and a better through line would help.
Something that may be relevant there, simply in terms of current events people are aware of, is the contrast between this case, the sort of out there telling people, and the Tyler Clementi case, which is a sort of a dramatic example of the intrusiveness into privacy and the exposure. I mean, that's a classic case of intrusive, non-voluntary exposure with consequences, as opposed to someone who is, as it were, flaunting it in people's faces. You get both of those, because both.
You could set that up as a very.
I think both of those are involved, and they have two current examples. The image that I think you might also want to think about, and I used it in a paper in the Image Ethics in the Digital Age collection, is of the multi-directional panopticon. I think I call it reversible panopticon there. I mean, part of what's happened, with new technology is that, as you say, everybody has to assume that they are being observed. But in the original panopticon, it was the powerful who were observing downwards. Now, it's as likely to go the other way, think macaca, or sideways. So we have omnidirectional panopticonism, or panopticonation, something.
I just want to state the obvious here. This is really going to be a better presentation if you don't read the paper to your audience, especially if you don't read it to them without looking up. You really want to work on talking about your paper. If that means you want to go for particular quotes or parts of it that you do read, so you give us a flavor of your elegant language, I think that's fine. But you really want to work on presenting the paper and literally making eye contact. Because if you don't make eye contact with your audience, they're going to retreat to their BlackBerries right away. They're not going to be with you anymore.
As loath as I am to draw people away from their BlackBerries, generally speaking, my practice is kind of mostly memorize it and try to do it without notes for that reason. Because otherwise, if I'm not reading it, I'm still like this.
I don't encourage you to memorize either, because then if you lose a place, you're going to get rattled. I would encourage you to so familiarize yourself with the story you want to tell about this line of research that you can comfortably get there. And I think the point Larry makes is a great one, because you kind of get into this without giving us the context of why it matters. And I think that kind of explanation at the beginning, I'm drawn to this kind of work because the paper is available for those of you who want to read this research. And I want to tell you the story about my interest, why this is so important, why this is a great opportunity. Give us a reason to want to hear it, especially at the beginning. Don't ever make self-deprecating comments. Gee, I hate to follow a good speaker, like, because, you just reduce your audience's expectations, right? Instead, tell us how enthusiastic you are to have this opportunity to tell us about this interesting, exciting research you've been doing. And you'll change the whole tone. I'm serious. You'll feel more confident as you bolster your own presentation.
I think I do need to sort of rewrite it with an eye toward telling the story.
I think that would help.
Rather than what I sort
and
of
I'm trying to be helpful.
I
think that would really help.
Which is basically, how do I fit part of my large argument into X number of pages?
Yeah. And time is always a huge challenge.
As far as timing went, you were about a minute and a half below the 12 minutes, so you have room to work with there.
Which shocked me. Yeah.
I think it's maybe worth acknowledging as a way of getting into the paper, the kind of reflexive nature of that you're talking about the private public nature of something that you're broadcasting to this audience, the NCA audience, so you're making public within the audience this video in and of itself. So I think there's sort of an entry point there. for the fact that you, without license from Halo Gay Boy, are writing a paper about him, without his knowledge necessarily, presenting it as a topic. It's sort of a way to think about people in the room, the very presence that they are, to then transport them from the immediate place into your paper.
I think we need to move on. Unless you have a quick.
I just had a quick stylistic suggestion, and that is, you could perhaps use just a couple of slides strategically. So, for example, putting up just a screenshot of the, Halo 3 Gay Boy, or, what Larry was talking about, kind of the traditional panopticon versus the new kind of way of thinking about panopticon as you're talking, in case some of your audience members may not be familiar with some of the examples that you're providing. If they see it, they might be like, oh yes, I see what Bill's talking about. So,
Okay. Our third speaker, astoundingly also from USC Annenberg, Lou, will speak on hidden profile studies for 25 years. So, obviously changing this since this was really a meta-analysis.
Sorry. Hello everyone, I'm Liu, a second year PhD student at Annenberg, and today I'm going to present a meta-analysis trying to quantitatively summarizing hidden profile studies over the past 25 years. My co-authors are Connie Yuan and Poppy McClain from Cornell University. So if you have any comments about this presentation, please feel free to contact them. All right, the first question is, what are the hidden profile studies? They are a research paradigm as a research tool to test informational and normative influence in group decision making. So one important assumption in group research is that group is a more effective information processor than a collective individuals because they can bring in more diverse opinions and also they can stimulate more creativity among each other. That's why we use groups so much. So in other words, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Well, one study by Stasser and Tigers in 1985 challenged this assumption of group. They designed a study in which three-person groups trying to find out the best job candidate during the group discussion. Each individual will receive an information package which contains both shared information, which is available to everybody, and also unshared information, which is only available to one group member. They manipulate the information such that the individual information everybody gets will actually favor the suboptimal choice, but only if everybody contributes their unshared information into group discussion, they can find the best candidate. So the best option is actually hidden from the group. That's why this is called hidden profile studies. And the surprising finding is that most groups failed to discover this hidden profile and unshared information, which is only available to the individual group members, was hardly mentioned during group discussion. So why does this happen? Sorry, that's my reminder to remind me to give this presentation. So why does this happen? Scholars soon realized that the major reason is because the predominance of shared information during group discussion. And the scholars have identified two major reasons why this happens. First, Stasser and the Tigers use information sampling bias to argue that because shared information is accessible to everybody, they have a higher probability to get mentioned. And also scholars identified because people want to avoid social cost, so they want to avoid mentioning unique information. For example, example, Wittenbaum and her colleague actually found out that people tend to give more positive readings to other people who actually mention the same information as themselves. So this kind of validation and encouragement there within the group gave people more confidence to feel like they're being accepted by the group. So all these are very brief reasoning why this happens. Anyway, the major point here is that groups actually mentions more shared information, and then in most cases they couldn't solve this case. So what do the empirical studies look like in the past 25 years? It's hard to kind of structure and present more than 200 empirical studies in one slide. So here I borrowed a model from Wittenbaum, Hollingshead, and Boser's Critical Review 2004. We can look at the group decision-making process as the input process and output process. For the input part, scholars actually look at variables such as information distribution, member characteristics, and task features, etc. For example, scholars can look at whether group members know each other or not before discussion can influence the group decision or not. And also, for the process, scholars look at whether ranking versus pick only one group decision will influence their group decision. So building on this model, our meta-analysis look at the 5 effect sizes or 5 relationships in this whole process. This is kind of rare in most meta-analysis. Actually, most meta-analysis, they tend to look at 1 or 2 effect sizes, but because in our meta-analysis, we tend to kind of summarize this field in the past 25 years. So we make such a decision. The first effect size we look at is the difference between shared and unshared information mentioned during group discussion. So in other words, we want to look at whether unshared information is actually mentioned less than unshared information. And if yes, how much? The second relationship we look at is the difference between shared hidden profile groups and manifest groups decision quality. The manifest groups are those where every group member has full access to the information. So whether hidden profile groups actually just perform worse than these groups. The third effect size we look at is the relationship between mentioning unshared information and decision quality. We want to look at what is the size or magnitude of the relationship between mentioning unique information and decision quality. For the fourth and fifth, we look at whether the communication technology will influence the information pooling and the group decision quality, whether it will help group make better decisions, as the research argues. So we collect all the articles from 3 ways. We search all the major databases, and we also send emails to the related listservs, and also contact experts in this field to get unpublished manuscripts. All these efforts leads to our sample size having 81 effect sizes from 49 papers. And we use comprehensive meta-analysis software, which has great flexibility of transforming all types of formats of data into the desired format of analysis. And for the first and fourth effect size, we basically comparing 2 continuous variables. So we are looking at the standard mean difference. And for the second and fifth effect sizes, we are comparing 2 categorical variables. So we look at the odds ratio. And for the third effect size, we look at the correlation. And then fast forward for the half years of coding and analysis, here comes the results. For the first effect size, our results suggest that on average, unshared information is 2 standard deviation less likely to be mentioned during group discussion than shared information. And hidden profile groups actually are 6 times less likely to solve the case than the manifest groups where everybody has full access to information. And for the third effect size, we have, so during the coding process, we actually found out that scholars operationalize information mentioning in different ways. We identified 2 major ways. The first is information coverage, which actually measures how much information got put out of the total available information. And the second discussion focus look at how much effort did the group devote into unshared information during the discussion. So the first one actually look at how much information covers 6 pieces of unshared information out of 60 pieces of all information got put out. And then the second one look at what the percentage of our group discussion actually devote to the unshared information. And our results suggest that the first information coverage category actually is a stronger predictor for the group decision quality. And for the fifth and fourth, we found out that the communication technology didn't help group put out more shared information, nor produce better group decision quality. And here I'm trying to recapture all the major findings. Since I have a time limit, I will skip these slides. And I want to emphasize one, I think, more interesting findings from this article. From our analysis is that this difference between information coverage and discussion focus actually goes beyond just the measuring or operationalization issue. It has actually distinctive conceptual implications. Our analysis suggests that information coverage is a stronger predictor. But when we think of these issues, we need to think the difference is that does it matter more if we cover more unshared information during group discussion, or we actually repeat these several pieces of unshared information more? Which one helps the group make better decisions? And also, the difference actually also depends on the task type. We run a moderation effect by the task demonstrability. When the task demonstrability is high, which means the task has a clear, correct answer, which is easy to show to other people. For example, it's a math task. If I show you how to do it, you know I'm right or wrong. And for the task demonstrability is low, which is more like a judgmental task, which we can negotiate whether it's wrong or not. So when we run the moderation effect of task type and these 2 type information, coverage and discussion focus, there is an interesting interaction effect. So which leads us to think that maybe there is an information pooling threshold. For information, for task demonstrability, high task demonstrability task, for example, it's all right. All right, I'm ready for comments then. So for the information pooling threshold, we found out that when information for a math task, maybe part of the information when it's reviewed, we can find out the correct answer. While for the low task demonstrability task, the judgmental task, it's better if we have all the available information out there. It's easier for us to make a judgment, to make a correct judgment. And also we want to emphasize that we want to look at the discussion content more rather than just counting the number of the information pieces. And thank you for your time.
More of a suggestion, also due to that you went over the time limit a bit. I think because of the audience is probably ones that are familiar with small group research, it's probably a good idea maybe to spend less time on the assessor inside this article from 85, which is the basics for the hidden profiles, and talk more about your results and what they mean. You sort of glossed through your results very quickly, but there were some very interesting results there, and elaborate more on what they mean and what they tell us. And also to leave more time at the end, both to talk about this distinction that seemed very interesting to me, but I just didn't have enough time, I think, to grasp it. And also about what this teaches us about where should hidden profiles go. So after this meta-analysis of 25 years of it, is there still a future for it, or is this, or are these questions solved, and what new questions does this pose?
Sure. Yeah, the first question is a good one, because I was trying to tailor this presentation to today's audience, and I have the analysis is more complicated, and I actually have like 4 moderators, which I will add into it for my essay presentation, and I'll cut the first 2 slides more for the group discussions.
Well, that's a good idea, because I had the same comment that Netta had, which is I would assume it's, given conference formats, that it's in the context of a panel and a session,
yeah,
where a lot of this is familiar.
Yeah.
Just as like a visual kind of thing, it's nice the way you set out the different effect sizes using the kind of schematic of the input, process, output thing. One of the things that you do when you go through that is use like a little underline to let us know where you are. I would like smack me over the head with that a little bit. That was a really subtle visual marker. The other thing I would do is, as you kind of talk through the different effect sizes, if you could, I see that you put them up there in text at the top of each of those slides, but if you could put it like next to where you say the effect size in that chart, and have that be cumulative, so you're kind of taking me visually like a board game, right? You're taking me through all of those effect sizes. I think it would have been clearer to me what they all meant together.
Yeah. I'll change that.
Another comment I had, that I think it's negated in part by the assumption that you're talking to a group that's sort of engaged with all of this. It's not entirely clear to me what the point is, in the sense that these are manipulated situations. Some indication of where in real life, in other words, this is created, the hidden profiles, because you give people information and you know what they share or they don't share. Whereas in real life, we don't necessarily know what people know, or so you have a kind of artificial test, which is then presumably generalized to real life situations, which are less controlled. Obviously, in most real life situations, people don't get little, lists which either have or do not have the same information. Now, in a larger context, I think that would be worth addressing. Like, what does this have to do with the real world? It may be that the people you'll be talking to have given up on the real world and all they talk about is this stream of research. But if they are interested in the real world, then I think there's a bridge there that might be worth away.
I should talk the real world implication more, because I think it has implications, because in most group decision making tasks, people hold different pieces of information. And also in a lot of situations, because different status or different motivations, people will hold out their individual information, just do not want to talk about it. And this actually, a lot of situations, it creates this hidden profile.
Right. No, we've talked about this before. I think it's worth, sort of giving some of that reason why somebody would.
You could do this with a very quick example. Just for instance, a search committee meeting where I know something but because I want to sabotage the candidate, I don't share the good news that I may have. Or because I want to hire the candidate, I don't share the bad news.
Why should you want to talk about you, Tom? But
I'm just saying,
I think some of your first responder examples would be, the ones that I'm talking about, where you have different professions coming together who have to solve a problem in real time, but have different perspectives or different knowledge bases.
I thought the technological implications was really provocative, because we tend to indulge in a little digital utopianism, and the fact that it didn't result in more information pooling or better decision making might deserve a little bit more attention. And you might also want to cast a critical eye on that, because if we're looking at 25 years, then some of that extant technology might be obsolete today. And so in fact, today's technology might result in better cooling and quality.
And that's true because some of the studies that are in the meta-analysis are mine that were done in the mid-1990s. That was exactly what you said.
Okay, one last comment here, question?
I very like your slides. It's a very nice way to do it. But maybe you could give more illustration on your resources. Based on what kind of reference do you make those conclusions? Because is the sample size large enough, or is it representative of the whole situation? And maybe there are some other factors that could influence the whole group discussion. So it's better to add them in.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Next Monday.